This week's show brought to you by Taco Bell's Nacho Fries. They are surprisingly good. Welcome back to another Boxscore Geeks Show. I'm your host, Ray Alvarez, known as Nerd Numbers pretty much everywhere I can be on the internet. And with me, as always, is my producer, voice of God, man of many hats, Brian Foster. Say hey, Brian.
What's going on, Dre? Making me a little bit hungry with that intro, but we got a lot of NBA news to talk about here.
I will not lie. I am a simple man. I was very excited to get Taco Bell for dinner tonight. It was like my wife had the kid and they went to a kids parade for the night. And she was like, we're not going to be home in time for dinner. I was like, I'm getting Taco Bell. So I try and eat here normally, but I was very excited about that. And yeah, they had nacho fries. They were good, which is just like fries with nacho toppings, and then you dip them in cheese. So anyway, I'm surprised it's the off season. We keep saying that the off season is going to get boring. I will say one issue we're going to talk it is the Kawhi Leonard trade that finally happened. We ended last week's show almost on a cliffhanger where we were like, we're just going to keep talking this. We're sorry if it's boring and redundant at this point, but it's the off season. There's not much more to talk. And then, of course, what ended up happening is Kawhi got traded. So we're going to talk Kawhi getting traded, Melo ending up on Houston, Jabari Parker revealing the truth about the Easter Bunny, and I think one more topic you had. Oh, and our boy Kevin Love gets paid. All right, so let's start with the meat and potatoes of the week. Let's start with Kawhi to Toronto. I am baffled. I was utterly baffled. So funny note, Brian, last week we did a show. I intended on getting the show notes up. I'm hit or miss on those, but I was like, let's get some show notes up this week. So I got up early one day to get the show notes up, and Kawhi got traded, and I ended up writing a Kawhi Leonard article instead, and then never got around to the show notes because I'm lazy.
Great article, though, Dre. I love it.
Yeah, so I mean, kind of copied an old school What Culture Wrestling, like just a what just happened, and what is. Let's just go. I'll rehash the bullet points of the article real quick, and then we can talk a lot more stuff because there's a ton to talk. The major point about this is Toronto just got better by a lot. The major thing is, if you look at Toronto last season was a 58-win squad. If you believe that Kawhi is healthy, which we have no reason not to believe, then essentially they have upgraded a decent to average shooting guard, DeMar DeRozan, to a finals MVP caliber player. And Kawhi, this is a sad one for me, Brian. It's kind of like the Oscars, where not every Oscar, best picture is created equal. There are some years where there were multiple good movies going at each other, and the Academy often doesn't even pick the right one in those cases. But
there can't be a Russell Crowe Gladiator every year, right, Dre?
Oh yeah, well yeah. So that's perfect. Like Russell Crowe Gladiator is a lot like Michael Jordan. That's a theory that Cracked the site actually, not the podcast, had about Oscars. Is a lot of best actor Oscar nominations and awards are retroactive, and they're makeups, if that makes any sense. So like Al Pacino winning for Scent of a Woman is them saying, "Are bad for not giving it to you for Godfather Part 2." And so the funny thing to that point, like the Gladiator, the Russell Crowe one, it's like, yeah, they're basically apologizing to Russell Crowe, I think, LA Confidential or something. And like that's a lot like Michael Jordan's.
Oh, yeah, he actually was good in LA Confidential.
I forget. It might have been. He was in a lot of good stuff to start his career. And, Michael Jordan's last MVP was kind of a makeup one. So that being said, Kawhi's MVP in 2016, which he didn't get, that's Steph Curry's unanimous MVP season. Kawhi's MVP performance in that season, which, as I mentioned, was runner-up, kicks the crap out of a lot of other years' MVPs, right? It's certainly a better MVP than, say, Derrick Rose's MVP in, I think, 2011. So it's just kind of one of these. I think Kawhi is obviously an MVP caliber player. If you finish top 3 in MVP voting at any point in your career, you're an MVP caliber player because there's only one award. I've lamented this a lot, even comparing it to other sports. Baseball's perfect. It's funny. I'm very jealous of baseball, as people who listen to the show know, because, baseball has 2 leagues, so they have an MVP for both leagues. They have basically, while it is possible for pitchers to win the MVP, they have a Cy Young, which is essentially the pitcher's MVP. So, they have awards for pitchers, offense and defense, essentially. They have league by league. They have a lot of other awards. So, like basketball, in my opinion, the awards haven't really grown to match the size of the league. The league was 8 teams, and we've had one MVP when the league was 8 teams. We have one MVP when the league is 30. Kawhi is an MVP caliber player, so you've essentially upgraded a good to average shooting guard on a finals-worthy team. That team collapsed in the playoffs, but is what it is. That's just impressive. It's funny. I got some flack for this, Brian, but I did say that move was essentially more important, in my opinion, than DeMarcus Cousins to the Thunder. Or not Thunder, apologies, Brian. Kevin Durant's the Thunder, or was the Thunder. The Warriors. Basically, you got a 58-win team and you just gave him an MVP player, whereas you have a 55-win squad right around there, 58 as well, that's losing ground to age, and you've given him a center that we have no guarantee is going to be healthy.
Yeah, that's right. And, so Kawhi's health is a big factor, like you said. He couldn't sit out, the season. And I agree with Patrick's article on leverage, right? That he probably had to play. So, the Spurs.
Because to recap what you're talking about, Patrick wrote an article before any of this went down that basically pointed out that in this negotiation, the Spurs held all the cards. They had the keys to a supermax contract to Kawhi. They have his bird rights for trading.
Yeah.
And if he sat out another year, it was entirely possible he'd tank his value. I'm not 100% sold on that. Like, I think LA would have still given him a chance. But in essence, the Spurs could say, we hold all the cards. So either A, you just suit up and play for us, and if you want to leave, fine. And we're going to keep hammering this nail, Brian. That's not a bad thing. A year of a superstar player is incredibly valuable. But what ended up happening is the Spurs seemed to blink, and the deal they got is, in our opinion, is ridiculously bad.
Yeah. So there's a rumor that they could have gotten, better assets from the Celtics or something like that, but they didn't want to rebuild, so they got DeRozan. And yeah, I mean, we disagree with that, right? I tweeted something like, even if Kawhi doesn't play a single game for the Raptors, by the way, he passed his physical, so the trade's going to happen, but let's say he gets hit by a bus tomorrow, still a pretty good trade for the Raptors, just getting rid of this contract. The DeRozan contract was not very good.
I'll be fair there. We've had this point before too, and DeRozan almost would fall in this category, but we'll talk about another bullet point which is, if you have a squad that can win a title. So as an example, let's say hypothetically, DeMarcus Cousins was a little healthier, because we still don't know his health. But let's say he hypothetically was a little healthiher, and let's say it was a little more expensive. Let's say it was like $12 million a year that the Warriors could acquire with, clever negotiations, an exception they have lying around, or some 3-team deal, right? And let's say you've got the Warriors and they lost JaVale McGee, but let's say they run out of centers, and the only players available is DeMarcus Cousins, and you say, look it. DeMarcus Cousins is going to be overpaid, but he's going to put this team over the edge. He's going to make this team a title-worthy team, and that doesn't come along very often. I don't mind overpaying. DeMar DeRozan almost falls in that category, right? This is a 58-win team. LeBron James just left the East. The Warriors are getting older. That is one thing, Brian, to keep coming back to this tangent, and we'll have to write about it. It is still remarkable to me, the PR battle that the Warriors are winning this offseason with DeMarcus Cousins, and that anybody that's actually a fan of this team, as you are, that watches them carefully, can just go, Andre Iguodala is amazing, but how much longer can he keep this up?
Yeah.
Sean Livingston didn't look good except for the playoffs last season, right?
Yes, out of nowhere, he was amazing in the finals, but did not have a good regular season. I'm surprised they brought him back this year.
Yeah, both Kevin Durant and Steph Curry have had injuries that have sidelined them 10 to 20 games in a season. Draymond Green has attitude issues that, have almost come to a head. Both Klay Thompson and Draymond Green have contracts that are up that might run into issues coming into the season. I am amazed at how many people are just almost like looking at the Warriors like, oh my God, this is so absurd, because it's entirely possible they go back to a fourth finals next year, and they've got to be the odds-on favorite to win it. But what's weird to me is people thinking this is some kind of coup, where when we look at dynasty squads in the NBA throughout history, right? I'm going to say modern NBA on, that's like 1980s on, you get like a 4 or 5 year window with the dynasty squad before you either need to like get some lucky infusion of new talent or it falls apart. So like the Lakers, as an example, with Kareem and Magic, a huge thing that happened is they got lucky and lucked into James Worthy in the middle. The Celtics, they actually kind of started falling apart. They got Bill Walton, but then after Bill Walton couldn't stay healthy, they fell apart. Obviously, the Bulls, the first three-peat, that just ended up being contract issues and Michael Jordan having to leave. They had to rebuild with Dennis Rodman and then completely fell apart. Same thing with both Lakers with Kobe, right? You got 4 or 5 years of amazingness of title runs before contract disputes, argument disputes, various other teams, right? Injuries caused it to fall apart. So this current Warriors, even with Kevin Durant, is basically just following a very normal pattern we've seen, which is you get an amazing squad with 3 or 4 stars. It lasts for about 4 or 5 seasons. And then if nothing else happens, that squad falls apart or gets worse.
Yeah, and that's why we like the Rockets, maxing out Chris Paul to a long-term deal. Even though he's too old and he won't be earning that contract probably in a few years, they have this title window they have to go for, right? And the and the Raptors do that with Kawhi. But I guess just to address your point, though, on, is it worth overpaying for DeRozan if you're the Raptors? Well, I guess I'll say it depends what time of the year it is, right? If it's later in the season and they're heading towards the playoffs like last year, they had a really good team. They're not going to I'm not suggesting they should stretch DeRozan, to save money and cut him from the team. He had an okay year last year, so just keep him, run him out there in the playoffs, right? But here we are in the offseason. They have an opportunity to move this contract, and that was one of my points on the script, is that by fixing that mistake that Masai made by giving him this contract, he's kind of restored my faith in him quite a bit.
So here, I actually had a different point to your time of year. This was the first people I've just followed immediately without checking it, so I didn't milkshake duck this person to see if they have but
5 minutes later,
Michael Ridsdale tweeted, should we make the DeMar statue out of ice so it can disappear once the playoffs come around, to the statue in front of whatever the Toronto Center is called. I've actually been there too. I haven't seen a game there, but it's a nice stadium. But the point is, and I wrote this in the article, the weird thing about DeMar DeRozan is I could argue he's worth overpaying if it puts the team over the edge. He is horrendous in the playoffs. And actually, here's another funny player. There are two. DeMar DeRozan and James Harden's playoff performance baffles me. It is such a night and day difference. If you look at their splits, and I mean, you expect players to get a little worse in the playoffs, right? You're playing stronger competition regularly. You're playing teams that are able to scout you, because that's a slight difference, right? You can't, in an 82-game season, you can't expect a team to be preparing just for you every single night, especially because, even if they have a plan to shut you down, well, one of their players tweaks an ankle, and it's like, well, we're going to sit that player out, so the plans go out the window, whereas the playoffs, that doesn't happen. So you expect players to get a little worse. DeMar DeRozan is downright terrible in the playoffs. So to you saying this team might get better, I actually to a degree agree. It's a fun sentence to say. That I would much rather have OG Anunoby, Darrell Wright. They picked up Danny Green. Funny note about Danny Green. I need to look more in depth on this, but I guess he had a groin tear last season. It wasn't that he wasn't diagnosed as injured. It was they didn't catch it. So they caught another injury and missed that he had a groin tear. He actually went down in performance. So I wonder about that. Essentially, I think they're better off in the playoffs playing some of their, I'll put in quotes, role players more minutes. I think that gives them a better shot, because it's kind of a funny switch to flip in that DeRozan in the regular season adds another couple wins for you, which is great. But then in the playoffs, he costs you. And, that this team has historically underperformed, and I was calling them cursed. And as I shouted out American Numbers, Arturo on Twitter, he just noted that essentially his thoughts are, if you get DeMar DeRozan off this playoff squad, their curse or whatever goes away. So I think you're kind of right to, I would be okay overpaying him if he was an average player in the playoffs, but he's not. So now they basically freed themselves from $27 million a year for the next 3 seasons. They got a decent replacement in Danny Green, who, they're going to have other players they're going to have to pick up the slack, namely scoring. But we keep saying, this is a Dave Barry point, is that it is ridiculous for anybody to think that shots can't be replaced. I hate this so much when someone's like, they lost Melo, he's their best shot creator. It's like, no, there's a shot clock and people can take it. One of my, I don't even call this a dark horse bet, Brian. I just think it's a smart bet. I think Jonas Valanciunas for most improved this season makes a lot of sense. If we think One, Nick Nurse is going to play him more minutes. So if he gets 10 more minutes, even 5, but 5 to 10 more minutes a game, there's no DeMar DeRozan, so there are a couple more shots around. So if you just increase Valanciunas' like shots per 36 by 2 and give him another 10 minutes, that's like another 3 or 4 shots a game. This was another amazing thing that I saw too in an article I was reading. Nick Nurse apparently loves Jonas Valanciunas taking threes. Last season, he only took 1 3 a game, shot 40% from 3. So if this season, he doubles that, right? Takes 2 threes a game, gets 10 more minutes, gets 3 more shots a game. I think he could up his shooting output by 5 points per game. So yeah, to what you're saying, like if DeMar DeRozan leaves and Kawhi doesn't suit up, they get better if he doesn't. I think their regular season win-loss might take a couple wins hit, but they can afford that in the East. But I do think that their playoff rotation can easily sustain that. And then now I actually need to go to Spotrac to check their contract situation. Either they're in a good situation with a great GM to do something with that free space now, or they have an opportunity for Kawhi to come back. What I found amusing, I'm nowhere near the first person to say this, and when I tweeted out, I made sure that was clear. So here was a funny myth last season about Paul George. Basically, they said, well, he's just a 1-year rental for OKC, but it's worth that 1-year rental because it let them get out of a bad contract, which was Victor Oladipo, and he's just going to be on the Los Angeles Lakers next season. That was the myth about Paul George. What did Paul George do in this offseason? He re-signed. He ended up re-signing with He ended up re-signing with OKC. And I think here's a very important aspect to that, which is kind of fascinating. In that, obviously, if a player hates a team, and whatever is going on between Kawhi and the Spurs, he does not want to be there, to the point that I almost find it laughable, some of what's kind of going on. And I'm trying to look up Toronto Raptors playoff or salary data in the background, so that's why I'm kind of sidetracked. He does not want to be on the Spurs. That's very clear. They offered him the Supermax at some point this offseason, I believe. I'll try and verify that just to make sure that's true. And he said no. When a player hates a squad, they will spurn money. But when a player even just halfway likes a squad and you put in front of him and say, if you leave, you're leaving $30 million guaranteed on the table, or you're leaving $20 million on the table, I can see the player going, I'm not going to do that. So I think Toronto's also in a fantastic spot to just re-sign Kawhi at the end of the season, depending on how things shake out.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, if they don't, it's not the end of the world either. Or they could do a sign and trade, something like that. So they have all kinds of options. And we've always loved Valanciunas. His biggest issue has been staying on the court. You know, he's a really big guy, so he has had some injuries. But when he's healthy, like in the playoffs, he's great. So yeah,
I don't think I'll say this as someone that plays a lot of DFS. It has not been injuries that, I think it's funny where it was very much a George Karl situation where Dwayne Casey, despite getting all the accolades for a 58-win squad, he would routinely just not play Valanciunas, and it would be baffling, right? Like I said, from a daily fantasy sports perspective, Valanciunas would be a good play for the day. Goes into the first half, he's averaging like a fantasy point and a half per minute, 2 fantasy points per minute. It's looking fantastic. The fourth quarter comes along and he's on the bench, and there's no reason for it. The game might be close. So Dwayne Casey did not like playing Valanciunas, whereas Nick Nurse does. So I think that too is just a huge difference.
Yeah, and Danny Green, they'll start him at shooting guard, or maybe it's DeLon Wright. But either way, those guys along with Lowry, they have 3 pretty solid point guard like players. And I think who is it? Ari Caroline maybe wrote about this first many years ago that teams just need to start playing 2 point guards, and it seems like the Raptors, along with other teams, like Houston obviously is a big one, have been moving in that direction.
I am not shocked, by the way, given the fact that Daryl Morey has a Morey ball T-shirt Arturo and I gave him at Sloan. I am not shocked in the slightest that the Houston Rockets seem to have copied 2 of what I would say are more of the wages of wins kind of impressive ideas that were put out there. One was, as you were mentioning, floor stretch by Ari Caroline, where he was noting that teams seem to be misusing the shooting guard position and 2 point guards might be better. The Rockets have 2 point guards. And then Arturo's, he wrote a paper for Sloan that didn't get accepted, but that means, of course, the people at Sloan saw it, about how teams need to take more threes. The Houston Rockets were the first team in NBA history last season with a three-point rate of over 50%. Now, if they would just copy the Andres Alvarez point, the Andres Alvarez Mark Cuban argument, just get good players. It's so annoying to see teams, and we'll get to that in a second, right, about the Houston Rockets hurting their playoff chances with Carmelo Anthony. I will say this on Toronto. This is going to be harder with Kawhi. They are over the luxury cap by a decent amount next season with both Kawhi and Jonas coming. They have a player option, so they're going to have to re-sign both of those players. So I think, if they lose Kawhi after the season, that certainly sucks. But as I said, the point I wanted to hammer home is 1 year of a superstar is so worth it. And what irks me is I think people implicitly know this. And the reason I say this is, we have always been at odds with the tanking mythology. We hate the idea of leaving multiple seasons on the table, which, for instance, Sam Hinkie did with the 76ers. He tanked multiple seasons in the hopes of getting high draft picks and hope that one of those high draft picks would become a star. We hate that. And then also anybody who accepts that that's a strategy also has to accept that there's an age curve. It takes players a couple seasons before they turn into stars. As we've noted, LeBron James, Kevin Durant, finals MVPs, some amazing players. They took several seasons before they developed into the players they are now. So if you are going to believe the mythology that you need to tank, which means waiting multiple seasons, and then wait multiple seasons after you've drafted a star to get a star, then it is weird to me to not think that just getting one season of a star, even as a rental, if it ups your playoff chances or finals chances, isn't worth it. The Raptors have their best shot of an NBA title this season they've had in a long time. And that's funny because they were a 58-win team last season that should have had a good shot. So, just in that regard, we are absolutely behind this move from many, many positions. It just put them in a great spot. And as you're noting, it's a funny one where I think they would have been more hurt too, where they would have been over the cap next year with DeRozan. The other kind of nice place to be is in 2021, they are completely open. If Kawhi used to come back, this team might just be Kawhi and Valanciunas going forward, which that's a lot to build off of.
That's true. Lowry's pretty old. Yeah, and in your article you had a great example of this: the Denver Nuggets and Andre Iguodala. He only went there for 1 year, but he got them into the playoffs. They gave up, a Flalo and Harrington, who cares about them, a couple of picks, but the amount of money you get for making the playoffs is a lot. So it's always going to be worth it to do something like this.
Well, it's very Moneyballish, very Billy Beanish, where the my shit don't work in the playoffs. Sometimes stuff happens in the playoffs. Sometimes Steph Curry slits. I keep getting this argument this week, Brian, and it irks me, and it's a funny one, which is in the 2016 playoffs where the Warriors blew a 3-1 lead, something I'm sure you aren't reminded about routinely as a Warriors fan.
Not after last season.
Steph Curry slipped on, I believe it was against the Rockets, he slipped on some sweat.
Yep. Monty Eunice.
And was just not 100% the rest of the playoffs. And what's amusing to me is people understand when a player is out, the impact that has, but people do not understand. Steph Curry was the first unanimous MVP in NBA history that season. He made 400 threes. I think wins produced, he was like 4 times as good as an average player or close to it.
There aren't very many seasons like that, by the way.
He was really good in the offseason, but he was nowhere close. So it's like, if you tell me you are replacing LeBron James with Paul George is a good player. I'm even going to talk old school Paul George, Indiana Pacers pre-injury Paul George. That is a fine player. That is a great player. I want that player on my team. But I am lying to myself if I say I'm replacing LeBron James with in his prime Paul George. There is a huge difference. So injured Steph Curry, who's not 100%, versus most dominant MVP in NBA history, Steph Curry, that is a huge difference. And that can make that team weak enough where a few other bad breaks, a suspension to Draymond Green, an injury to Andrew Bogut, LeBron James remembering how to play basketball in the finals, that can cost you. So, the playoffs are just more random. It's entirely possible this team wins 60 games and doesn't win a finals, but we are always like, if you believe that it is worth losing seasons for high draft picks or gambling at all on a player with upside. I see that a lot too. Like, you have to spend the money because that's the only star. If you believe any of those myths, then you have to believe that this is worth it. And the good news for me is a lot of people on the internet that I like and respect agree with this take. They think it's an absolute coup for the Toronto Raptors.
Yeah, and my last thing on this was more on the business side. Yeah, great job summarizing, the basketball side, but this kind of side story that's still kind of going on. We have an article today in SB Nation titled "DeMar DeRozan on the Raptors' reasoning for trading him." Quote, "It's BS to me." And the story here is, I guess, again, Masai Ujiri, the GM of the Raptors, promised him recently he would not trade him, but then this opportunity for Leonard came up, so he did it, and DeRozan is upset about this. Well, it's foolish, right? The NBA is a business. We've been saying that for decades. They should know this. I think it's foolish of both sides, honestly. It's foolish of DeRozan to believe him when he was told he wouldn't be traded and then to be annoyed at it afterwards. And it's foolish of Masai to make that promise even to begin with. What it reminds me of is the movie Team America, the scene where the male lead is trying to have sex with the female lead, but she's, I guess shell-shocked about all the war and chaos around her, and she says, I don't want to lose somebody else. Promise me that you'll never die. And he says, I promise you that I'll never die. Come on.
Funny is he says, I can't make you that promise. And she says, well, I won't have sex with you if you don't. And he says, right. I'll never die. And yeah, so I think you were saying the title of this show, it's not a bad one, is like DeMar DeRozan promised me you'll never trade me. I just added to the script, Brian. It's one of my favorite commercials ever. It's a Jason Kidd, Vince Carter. Remember that, the Brooklyn Nets days when they were, or New Jersey Nets when they were on the Nets day?
That's right.
It's a fantasy sports commercial. Not even daily fantasy, like old school fantasy, where Vince Carter and Jason Kidd are in the locker room, and the GM, you're the GM, right? Because that's this commercial, is saying, listen, Jason Kidd, I'm sorry I have to trade you. And Vince Carter is like, we're a package deal, man. You can't trade Jason Kidd. And starts rattling off his stats. And then he says, I got Steve Nash. And the guy says, see ya. This is, so what's amusing to me about DeMar DeRozan and the Team America point you just made is it's so, I don't want to be mean here, but I'm probably going to be. That's what you were saying. Like, I hate being mean, but sometimes we have to be mean. I do not know what realm you exist in the NBA. And this was another tweet I got a bunch of love for recently. It's probably a ways back. But I basically said, in the NBA, if you are not a top 10 player in your prime on a contract with a couple of years left, or you're lucky enough to not have a no-trade clause, you are always on the block. And if you don't believe that, it means your GM is either a liar or incompetent.
This is Chris Lee, the Alliance kind of stuff, right? You have to set expectations.
Yeah, we had like an email back when this happened. This was like so weird when this entire thing happened, where we were back and forth emailing. But yeah, we've talked to Chris Ye, who wrote a book, The Alliance, and one of the big takeaways Chris Ye has in The Alliance, and this lines up very well with another writer I like very much, Dan Ariely, is that when you are dealing with people in any type of relationship, it is very important to be upfront with the expectations of said relationship, and where things start falling apart is where you get false expectations. And so the reason we like the book, The Alliance, it applies a lot to tech, but could apply to other fields, is he comes up with this term called the tour of duty, where essentially a worker and an organization get together and they're like, for a short period of time, usually 1 or 2 years, here's how we're going to work together. Here's what you're going to get out of it, the company. Here's what I'm going to get out of it, the worker. At the end of it, we should both be in a better position, but being very upfront about the nature of tech workers, which is most tech workers don't last at a job more than a year or two. So when you're planning around a new worker, instead of saying, what's your 5-year plan, which is BS, you should be saying, look, in a year, how can we put you in a better position so that you have more skills, your resume is better, you're in a better spot to advance at this company, versus the employer going, what can you do for us in a year that helps us out as a company? That is a very mature way of dealing with it. And Dan Ariely's metaphor is like, if you're ever a client of a bank or something and they're like, at bank one, you're family. And then all you have to do is overdraft your card once, or forget to pay your credit card once, or whatever. And they're like, we're sorry, we're going to have to charge you $50. And you go, I thought we were family. Can you do anything for me? Like, rules are rules. It's like, well, clearly we are not family. And Chris Ye and the Alliance brings that up too. A lot of companies love the we're family. And it's like, no, you can't fire your mom. If your mom ticks you off, you don't kick her out of the family. Whereas if a company, if you tick someone off, you can get kicked out. So it's the mature thing. And so in the NBA, if you don't know that, you are lying to yourself. And at this point, DeMar DeRozan on a on a contract without a no trade clause has to know this is the case. Now it's possible, and we've questioned this a lot in a lot of players, that DeMar DeRozan might overvalue his own worth, and that he might think to himself, why are they trading for me for Kawhi? I'm just as good as Kawhi. We've questioned things like this with, like, we think that Kobe Bryant has to know in his heart of hearts that he is not on the same level as Michael Jordan or LeBron James. We hope he knows this. And I kind of did more wingish players than Shaq. We'd hope he'd also know he's not on the same level as Shaq. But it's in players' best interest to hype their own egos and for their own brand, right? You want to. There is no reason Kobe Bryant should ever tell anybody they're wrong if they tell him he's a top 5 all-time player. Why would he? Why would he ever do that? But then we also question if doing that long enough makes the player have a misconceived notion of themselves. But so, yeah, all we're saying is, like, DeMar DeRozan, it's a business, and he should know this. And that always makes me laugh. The NBA, by the way, that's one of the other the bandwagon fans, the fair weather fans. That always irks me because it's like, sports are a business. You have to pay for a ticket. If a restaurant stops serving good food, I stop going there and I give it a bad Yelp review. It's so funny that people think it's some dig to say you're not a real fan because when your team got bad, you stopped rooting for them. It's like, no, that's adult and mature. So to DeRozan, it's him believing the tell me you'll never die. If he bought that, if he and Masai Ujiri had that conversation, he believed that he is naive as a puppet. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, and this culture, I think, is very old in sports. Root for the laundry instead of the players is this classic thing. It's like the sports talk radio culture, from the 90s is what it makes me think of. But, I mean, what you don't hear, though, back then anyway, as much as now, is, the radio station, sometimes is owned by the team or at the very least wants to win the contract. So, of course, the talk show hosts are going to flack, for the team. And so, yeah, you got to be loyal even when we're crappy, because no one's going to listen to their show even if people stop watching the team when they're bad. So, yeah, everyone in the media industry is always going to say that. But, come on, this is the real business world here.
Well, actually, I'm gonna get on our political soapbox for the week here.
Oh, here we go.
This is a funny one, and I find it became too much true of just the mainstream media for politics, but it was always true for sports. I find a lot of Trump's presidency is depressing and sad to me, and his election was sad to me. But a lot of the reason I'm not as surprised as maybe others might have been is because I've been doing basketball blogging forever. As we've noted, despite the fact that we're part of the if I was on camera, you'd see my quotes and my eye roll, the advanced stats movement of basketball, we see so many people have no fuck what they're doing when it comes to the numbers, that have no idea what they're talking about. And yet they say that. Whereas in politics, there aren't even people that claim that they know what the hell they're talking about. There was a great Tom Nichols thread today that I read where he was talking with two Trumpers, and he basically just kind of said, none of what you are saying is true. I can't have a discussion with you because everything you are saying is incorrect. And it's not me telling you that I think you're a bad person for believing it. I'm telling you that you are incompetent, that I can't proceed with this discussion. So we've seen the same is true in sports. Despite the fact that these people proclaim that they know what they're talking about, it's very obvious very quickly they don't. But what's a bigger issue about the sports media is that they are really, as you were just saying, it was a great point, Brian, they are really mouthpieces for the teams in many cases. Adrian Wojnarowski, this is a point Kevin Draper brought up a bunch, is Adrian Wojnarowski's scoop journalism is a tit-for-tat agreement with teams. Essentially, the way Adrian Wojnarowski is allowed to leak who is going where or what draft pick is happening when a millisecond faster, I mean, he's essentially doing high-frequency trading with NBA News. The way he is able to do that is people in NBA organizations say, look, I want you to feed information. I want you to say, we want to trade Ben Wallace. So I want you to say that there's interest in Ben Wallace. I said Ben Wallace just because he's in front of me, but they're contemporary names. And for what it's worth, the Detroit Pistons were one of the teams. They did like a sting operation where they sent out a memo to front offices where they basically, it was the same kind of number, but I've heard various sites do this where it's like it was a different decimal point at the end. And so then when the information was leaked, they were able to say, well, the team that gave it out had to have been one of these teams because that was the decimal that was fed. There was a sting operation where Adrian Wojnarowski was basically linked to, sending favorable information for the Pistons. In sports media, this happens all the time where The agreement basically is in order to get access, reporters basically will cape for the team. They'll say what the team wants them to say. And I think that's huge. So like when you're saying like DeMar DeRozan possibly believing the hype, it's like, yeah, that the reason that station is saying that about you is because the front office lets them in. And if you start saying DeMar DeRozan isn't worth $27 million a season, well, now it's going to be harder to trade you. So of course they're going to be on your side. So it's like we were saying, I don't remember if this made this on the air, Brian, but we were talking pre-show where like the thing about Sam Hinkie, the reason he got ousted from the 76ers wasn't him tanking, even though we disagreed with that. And we would say that'd be a fine strategy. Clearly, the 76ers approved it. They signed off on that plan, which is on the 76ers. So we applaud. Sam Hinkie clearly did a very good job at executing that plan. We just didn't like that plan. The thing that irked people was just how obvious he was being, because the rules were you were supposed to say, no one is supposed to believe this, right? No one is supposed to actually admit that we're tanking. Same thing you're saying. No one is actually supposed to admit that this player that is our franchise player is overpaid, but it's kind of a well-known secret. Like I said, that commercial I put, the Jason Kidd one, it was a joke in that everybody know. I'm going to use this as an excuse to jump off to another brief point, which is Jabari Parker.
Yeah, let's do it.
Jabari Parker got signed to a 2-year, $20 million a year deal with the Chicago Bulls. We talked it a lot last week. We basically said the Milwaukee Bucks dodged a bullet, and the Chicago Bulls now became the Chicago grenade jumpers, because they jump on grenades to save other teams from bad decisions, is what's been happening the last few seasons. And Jabari Parker said this in an interview. He said, defense doesn't get you paid in the NBA. And by the way, it's funny. It's like it's almost as if he heard our talk about him last week, Brian, because when you were talking to Jabari Parker, you basically said, he's an okay scorer, but he doesn't do any of the things you want a big to do. He doesn't rebound, block shots, probably doesn't play defense that well. But he came out and said this, and he was getting a lot of flack. And it's the exact same DeMar DeRozan never trade me point. I was like, this is a well-known secret. Everybody in the NBA knows that defense doesn't get you paid. What amused me so much is I tweeted that out. I was like, he's totally right. And someone was like, what about when Ben Wallace got that 4-year, $50 million contract back in the day? And my thinking was, Ben Wallace is arguably, if not the top, if he's not the very top, right? He's tied for the most defensive player of the year awards at 4. But, you could maybe argue like Hakeem Olajuwon. But, Ben Wallace is one of the top 5 defensive players in the NBA. He had just won a Defensive Player of the Year award. He got a contract that was basically the same value as Rasheed Wallace. So it's like you have to list the best Defensive Player of the Year in recent history in the NBA that didn't even get a max contract that happened a decade ago to try and give me a counterbalance. And here's a fun one I didn't realize, Brian. Rudy Gobert is signed to a $100 million contract, I think, over 4 years. But he has incentives in it. So like Andrew Wiggins got like a max deal and he sucks. Now, while Rudy Gobert got a great contract, it's incentive laden instead of just being fully guaranteed. So it's like you can be the best defender in the NBA and you might get a max deal or close to it. Whereas if you were a top 20 scorer, you are guaranteed to be paid the max. That is just the truth.
Yeah, the last sentence in this article you linked is pretty funny. They use defensive real plus minus, so we'll just ignore that. But the point is still funny. His Bulls teammate Zach LaVine also ranked pretty low, 84 out of 97 for point guards. Chicago isn't positioning itself to be the best defensive team this season.
I want to get a brief tangent on defense or kind of recapping some stuff we've said before. There are a few things that bug me on defense, and one relates to football. So Dave Barry, who's done all the research about wages of wins and the father of this site as well, has talked about how hard it is to grade football. And the reason it's hard to grade football is, let's say you've got a player that averages 4.5 yards per carry. And that might seem very good, right? If you did that 3 carries in a row, you'd always get a first down. It's entirely possible that the plays that they've designed for that player, he was supposed to get 8 yards a carry or 9 yards a carry. We don't know the plan in football, so it becomes very hard to judge players, because what you are trying to judge on is how good did they execute the task you assigned them. But what makes it hard for us bystanders is the coaches don't say, oh yeah, by the way, I was expecting that pass to get 15 yards and the guy didn't get open and the quarterback threw a 5-yard, screen pass instead. This play underperformed what we were expecting. They don't tell us that. The same is true on defense. we do not know defensive assignments in the NBA. This is a point that Andrew Sutton has brought up before. If I've got a number like defensive plus minus, and by the way, shout out to Daryl Morey of the Houston Rockets, who, when asked in like an Ask Me Anything, responded. Someone was like, "Are any of the publicly available defensive metrics good?" And he was just like, "No." Thank fuck defensive rating, the defensive RPM. Daryl Morey approves. But we don't know if Jabari Parker is bad at defense because he's a bad defender, or if he was given a bad defensive assignment. This was a funny note we had forever about David Lee, one of our favorites, who got infamous because he showed up in an infographic at a Sloan talk by Kurt Goldsberry about him being bad at defense. Now, here's the question. Is David Lee bad at defense, or is David Lee a power forward who is routinely asked to guard other centers when he shouldn't be? And we've said that about like Kevin Love as well. Kevin Love might be a bad post-up defender, but he's like a fantastic rebounder, good at not fouling. So it's like, is the reason this player is bad because they are bad at defense, or because they are played at a bad defensive scheme? And one of our favorites on the show, Ty Willingham's a retired basketball blogger, wrote many years ago about defense, basically said, defense seems to be largely based on the team scheme. Year-to-year defense is very volatile if you don't try and factor in the coach and the scheme. So when we're talking about players that are bad at defense, where it gets even harder to know is, are they bad at defense because they're bad at defense? Are they bad at defense because they're in a bad scheme? This is one of my favorite notes I always bring up is Kevin Garnett. Kevin Garnett was on a bottom 10 defense in the NBA the year before he won Defensive Player of the Year. It's a hard thing to judge. And as I just was talking about with people not knowing the media, I do not believe the people who are going over the stats, the people that just read Basketball Reference to me, actually understand defense or how to do statistics well enough to grade players. So to that point, on Jabari Parker's point, it doesn't get you paid. And as an NBA player, why the hell would you focus on it when you know it's incredibly hard to judge? So it's a very don't kill the messenger. We are always on the player's side. Let's try and get another point. Brian, I think I can go smoothly.
Oh, good work.
Let's get to Carmelo Anthony. This was a very funny note that I can't believe I'm defending. This is like hell, Brian. Trump is president. I'm defending Russell Westbrook and Carmelo Anthony. I don't know what the hell is going on. Because if you recall, like when I started blogging, Obama was president. I was calling Russell Westbrook and Carmelo Anthony overrated. So what is going on? Carmelo Anthony has no business being on the Rockets. He did. I don't know the full terms. Do you know what happened there? I believe he got traded.
Yeah, it was a 3-team deal involving Atlanta. Oh, no, wait, this is old.
So yeah, he got traded to Atlanta. I don't know if he was waived. I want to see how he got to the Rockets.
Yeah.
So this gets nice and confusing. I'll get Basketball Reference up for the original trade. See if you can find an article about how Carmelo Anthony ended up on the Rockets, because I think they signed him for not a lot, but we still think it's a bad move. But Carmelo Anthony being a Hall of Fame player has become a really weird topic on the internet lately. And to me, it's just baffling. Where it's like, well, of course he's a Hall of Fame player. He led the NBA in scoring. He's a multi-year All-Star. He's got an NCAA title. He's got multiple Olympic gold medals. There is no question, as Chris Yeh always points out, it is the Naismith Basketball Hall of Fame, not just the NBA Hall of Fame, but even by the conventional measures of the NBA, he goes in. We don't agree with this. I've said this a lot before. I may not agree with the criteria that the Naismith Hall of Fame lets people in on, but if I accept that certain players, Tracy McGrady as an example just got in for certain reasons, I have to accept that Carmelo Anthony, by those metrics, is an easy all-star. Now, if we want to argue that the Hall of Fame should be torn down, started over, fine. But what irks me is I'm like, there is no question that the Naismith Hall of Fame institution, as is, would not accept Carmelo Anthony as a first-team Hall of Fame ballot person. And to the same point, one of the notorious factors about him is he has never really played defense, or has been notorious for not playing defense, which again amused the hell out of me because, let me try and get this up in front of me really quick, Brian. So last year, the Oklahoma City Thunder ranked 9th in defense at the end of the year, and I believe they were even better when Roberson was healthy. So it's like he played on a top defensive squad, just all of the stuff we just said about defense, but it was never his focus. But so Melo kind of realized that he's the poster child about what gets you paid. So Jabari Parker was just the messenger saying, we're focused on getting paid. We're not focused on winning games. We're not focused on defense. And it's bizarre to me to bash him for that. Now, Melo to the Rockets. So what did happen is he was traded. This is all out of date. Sorry, so I have no idea. I'll try and go to Spotrac. But he's on the Rockets, and what was funny, I saw this. He is now apparently lowering the odds of the Rockets to win the finals, which means Vegas knows what's up. Now, here's what's interesting. Carmelo Anthony is actually a better DeMar DeRozan in his prime, in my opinion. Meaning, he's overpaid, he's overrated. But so if you look at like Carmelo Anthony when he was in New York, when he first signed there, I think he was worth like 8 or 9 wins. And I think he's played well in the playoffs. Melo, if you thought he was just the thing to get you over the hump, which, by the way, the Rockets were in that scenario, would probably be worth it. Now, the issue, though, is Carmelo Anthony isn't a spring chicken anymore. He's 34 years old. He's nowhere close to his prime. And so when it comes to Melo signing, it's a weird point we've always made, which is just don't sign bad players. Signing Melo hurts them because he's an opportunity cost to the Houston Rockets. The Houston Rockets are a good team with a very short window to win a title, especially with Chris Paul's age. And, James Harden's getting older too. And they've signed a player that is way on the downswing. If you get his wins produced numbers up in front of us, Brian, I think it's very stark, right? If I'm not mistaken, I think like
he was the worst player in the league last year, and it wasn't even close.
You said this last week, and actually that's a fun article, Brian. If people listening, or Brian, remind me if you don't see this, like it would be fun to see like the best worst players of the year, because you pointed out he won it by like almost 2 wins, which is a lot.
Yeah, I've got it up right now. Second place. Well, we talked about this a few weeks ago, right? Jay Crowder got injured and traded. Terrible year. He was negative 2.9 wins. Carmelo Anthony was negative 4.2.
But yeah, I mean, if you look at Carmelo Anthony's like points over par, he's basically just kind of been on the downhill swing for years now. I think he was decent his first couple of, he was decent his first year in New York. Looks like he got injured his next season, came back and was okay. Got worse last 2 seasons ago, and then was horrible last season for OKC. So it's just like, if you look at his curve and trajectory, there is absolutely no reason you'd want this player at all. And it's, it is always a funny point. We bring this up a lot, which is just having a bad player on your squad is an opportunity cost, because that's minutes and shots that could be going to another player. So, like I said, Carmelo Anthony definitely realized don't play defense, do what gets you paid. We're completely on Carmelo Anthony and Jabari Parker's side for that note, for doing the smartest moves, for getting them paid. Carmelo Anthony saying, I'm not going to come off the bench. We noted Dwayne Wade may have helped his career in terms of getting more longevity, but he hurt his value by coming off the bench, by being a team player. I hate to say this, until the NBA pays for the behavior they want, do the behavior that's going to get you paid. The same point about like Kevin Durant getting like flack, or LeBron James getting flack. It's like, your goal isn't to be popular, because people are going to hate you no matter what. It's to get paid. That's his job. So we're behind Melo, we're behind Jabari Parker, but oh man, is this a bad move by the Rockets? As mentioned, the Rockets are the San Francisco Giant of analytics moves, and they are in an even season or whatever, odd season, whatever year the Giants don't win.
The Giants were even, yeah.
Yeah, so whatever is the case, Daryl Morey, he had an amazing 2 seasons ago. It was Eric Gordon and Ryan Anderson. We're like, what the hell? Then he got Lou Williams, and then boosted Lou Williams to Chris Paul. You're like, you're back. This season, it's Carmelo Anthony. We're like, what the hell? So next season, he might end up with Kawhi.
Yeah, and it's funny you bring up Eric Gordon, because that might be the only upside of this for the Rockets, is Carmelo Anthony will take Eric Gordon's minutes potentially.
It's not upside though, Gordon.
But he's even worse. It's
Melo's worse than Gordon.
That's what I meant to say. But no, here's the thing. So I think the same thing about Anthony on the Rockets as Isaiah Thomas on the Nuggets, which is that in a vacuum, if you and I were running the team, obviously we're not better at it than Morey, but just on this one thing we would be, which is, you can cut your losses with a player this cheap, right? You just say, well, they're not playing that well. Let's just bench them for the playoffs. That's fine. But the danger here is I don't think they will bench him for the playoffs. I think they'll give him a lot of minutes in the playoffs, and it could be like a season-ending move for them. It could be the difference between beating the Warriors or not, similar to Eric Gordon last year.
And I know you liked this, because I pointed that out. We keep talking the Warriors, and what is funny to me about the Warriors, again, is this mythos around them, especially after Kevin Durant signed with them, which is just they are this unstoppable juggernaut that's unfair for the NBA. And what amuses me is, Kevin Durant joins that squad. They're even better than the year before by SRS, which is, strength of schedule adjusted point margin. So despite the fact that they, I think, only won 66 games, they were actually a better squad than the 73-win squad the year before. As soon as you get over like 65 wins in the NBA, a lot of it just comes down to kind of luck of the draw. How much do you win close games by? How much do you win overtime games by, et cetera? So anyway, it looked like that after one season, right? Oh my God, this is so unfair, Kevin Durant. And the same was true of the not 6, not 7, not 8. I think it was 8, what he said, right? The not 6, not 7.
I can't count that high, Dre. I don't have enough fingers and toes.
What the? Okay, anyway. But, they made it to the finals the first year. They steamrolled the finals the second year, right? This is so unfair. But teams get very fragile very, very quickly. And the same thing happened with the Warriors, right? One season with Kevin Durant, this is so unfair. Last season, oh my goodness, they're in a 3-2 hole, and it takes Chris Paul getting injured. And then what we've noted is...
And the 0 for 27 three-pointers. It was the Warriors were buried and dead and managed to dig their way out of the ground in that series.
Holy cow. And so what has amused me, though, is 2 years in a row now, there has been a very strong team in the West that has hurt themselves with Melo. We noted last season, if they just had a replacement level, so let's not even like 1 wins produced, wins per 48, which would be an average NBA player. And we think, for what it's worth, there is no excuse for any NBA squad to not have a roster full of at least average starters. That is inexcusable for any team, in my opinion, barring like unluck, right? Like a player gets injured or something. But Melo was worth -4 wins. If you have a 0 as your starting small forward, power forward, right? I'd say Paul George and Melo basically were small forward, power forwards. You could call it a hybrid or whatever. You have a 0 there. That's a 52-win squad and a couple more wins. And instead of being, I think, the 4 seed, they might have been able to climb up to the 3 seed and have a better favorable seeding. And then Melo, too, for what it's worth. I'm looking at his playoff. Actually, here's a question, Brian, I haven't looked into. How were his playoff stats last year? Because I keep forgetting that Patrick put that up. But Melo shot 12 shots per game in the playoffs last season, and he did so on a true shooting of 45.2%. That is horrendous. Just absolutely bad. So I can't buy that he was very good. According to Patrick's playoff numbers, he was worth, negative 0.3 wins on his own, which in a 6-game series, that's a big deal. So, he was just as bad in the playoffs as he was during the regular season. So there are 2 seasons in a row where a key competitor to the Warriors has basically shot themselves in the foot, in my opinion, by signing Carmelo Anthony. And people are going to forget this, right? They're going to say, it is so unfair that the Warriors made it to 4 straight, it'd be what, 5 straight finals, right, at this point, if they make this year? Am I crazy?
Yeah, they've won 3 and lost 1, so yeah.
It would be make it to 5 straight, win 4, or win 3, win 4, lose 1, right? People will say it's so unfair. And they will just forget these other things where other good teams made stupid maneuvers, or, Kawhi got injured. They were up. The San Antonio Spurs were up the first game of the series a few years back in the conference finals. Then Kawhi gets injured and they steamroll him. And as we were just saying, an injured player changes the difference. So just to that point, the real sad part of Melo here is, and Vegas agrees, he hurts Houston's chances of winning a title. What we really hope happens is, like, mid-season, they're just sick of Melo and, like, maybe sick of Eric Gordon, and they're like, shut it down, and they trade Eric Gordon and Carmelo Anthony for, let's say, DeMar DeRozan.
Yeah, it just all depends how many minutes he gets. We always say stars are what wins in the NBA, right? If you can get the most superstars, you're going to win. But then a player who's really, really a negative producer can almost negate a star by being, worse enough compared to an average player, rather than a star would be better than them. So anyway, that's all I got on that.
Or as I was phrasing it last week, putting it in terms we've used before, Patrick has called it his rungs to success in the NBA, where basically to go from a decent team to a star team, you have to go up rungs. And you could view like getting a star player as a rung, getting a couple of good role players as a rung. And essentially on that point, a negative wins producer can knock you down a rung. So you might, we fully expect the Houston Rockets to make the playoffs, but this definitely hurts their chances. Another player in the same boat makes me just as sad, by the way. My Denver Nuggets, if they give minutes to Paul Millsap. So in the West next season, the Warriors can thank their lucky stars that some of the best teams in the West with some good players are going to be giving minutes to Carmelo Anthony, Andrew Wiggins, and Paul Millsap. In fact, that's a really fun article. I might make the Warriors all stars by not being on the squad, if that makes any sense. Players that help them out just because they're making what could, if you replace Paul Millsap, Andrew Wiggins, Carmelo Anthony with an average player, and I swear to God, any half-decent analytics squad could find you one for $5 to $10 million in the NBA. If you just replace those guys with average starters, and you could even look for specific things that you need, right? Like we can go to the Rockets and say, okay, Chris Paul and James Harden are going to get you this many passes, and we're going to get this many threes, and so we need this many rebounds and this many blocks, and maybe a player that does this on defense. We can find you that. Melo is not the answer. So we'll see. Last point, I just had a funny take that I wanted to respond to, which was someone noted like Dirk Nowitzki is still playing at 40, so people pointing out that Melo used to be good and is now over the hill shouldn't matter. I hate it when people use outliers when you're trying to explain a trend. When I say most players, Dave Barry in Stumbling on Wins brought this up, and I've called the term NBA players age like milk. And the point being, as players get older, there's just a certain point where they spoil. And you see this in pretty much every player, I think, with the exception of John Stockton. I think every player in the NBA just hits a point where they're just not themselves anymore.
The only other one I can think of is Jason Kidd. Him and Stockton played really well into their late 30s and even 40s.
An interesting point on that I would say more of with, like, say, Jason Kidd and Tim Duncan is there are players that change up their game, David Robinson as well, that basically say, I'm going to change the role I play, kind of what Dwayne Wade did, but Dwayne Wade still couldn't do it effectively, where they change up the role they play and are still productive. Whereas I would say, I believe at least looking per minute, I think John Stockton just did the same stuff his whole career and was amazing at it. Players age like milk. There's just a certain point where they spoil. And that's most players. So when I say players age like milk, it looks like Carmelo Anthony is spoiled. And people go, well, here's some players that didn't spoil. I'm like, okay, that doesn't disprove the overall trend. I don't really care too much about the remaining free agent. Oh, actually, there's one free agent.
Kevin Love? Or did we talk Kevin Love already?
We didn't talk Kevin Love. Good on Kevin Love. He got not a fully I was going to say, I'm curious. You're saying, according to this, that he maybe could have gotten the max from Cleveland?
Yeah. So I'm going off this. No, not this article. Where's the one I had? Anyway, yeah. When I dig up this article, I want to say they said he took $8 million under the cap under the max, and it has a little bit of relief in the back end. So it's a slightly team-friendly deal compared to the max.
Still curious if the max was on the table, because again, as I noted, a lot of these are mouthpieces, right? A lot of these articles that come out. So there's no, if Kevin Love's agent can't get him a max deal and has other clients that he's representing, he has no incentive, I'll say they, because I have no idea if male or female, they have no incentive to tell the world, hey, by the way, I couldn't get Kevin Love the max, because when you're arguing on behalf of other clients. So I'm just curious what Kevin Love's open market value is given his injury and stuff. But that being said, I'm just happy, he got another big contract. It's a funny situation. He's basically in the Chris Bosh situation, where I argue his individual stats probably took a hit because he played next to Kyrie and LeBron James for all those years. But he got a title out of it. He did not. I don't think he hurt. I want to see what his All-Star game selection and stuff was. But he certainly didn't hurt his pay. He still got paid. I think I think he has to have, if anything, boosted his finals or his Hall of Fame chances. So, I think from this regard, I think maybe he cost himself an All-Star game or two, possibly because he dropped to 16 points per game the first two seasons. But he's made an All-Star game the last two seasons, despite the fact that he hasn't played over 60 games. Played 60 2 years ago and 59 last year. This just worked out well, and we love it because Kevin Love has been one of our favorite players forever, and we just thought Minnesota didn't know what the hell to do with him. And so we are just glad that he's at least, getting a nice end of his career with all this stuff.
Yeah, it looks like he will make the max early in the deal, but then later on in the deal he makes less than it. That's what's going on with it. And, I do like this deal for the Cavaliers, too. I think it's similar to Chris Paul. Obviously, Love's not quite as good as Chris Paul, but he's pretty damn good. But in that, maybe it won't be as great at the end of the deal, but it lets them stay in the mix for now. I half expected the Cavaliers, once LeBron left, to be, this is a great excuse for us to tank and be a crappy team and still rake in the revenue sharing without having to compete or pay our players, because Cleveland has been one of the biggest, luxury tax paying teams. So to their credit, they opened the wallet for Kevin Love and are stating, we don't want to tank. We want to keep fighting for the playoffs without LeBron. And, they with Love, and they still have Tristan Thompson, and if he's healthy and, not making reality shows, he's still pretty good on a pretty good contract. They could still compete a little bit in the East. They're not a title contender probably anymore, but they're, maybe one lucky draft pick or free agent away from getting back in the mix. So I like this for Cavaliers.
I'm not a huge fan just because I think he's old and beat up, and that's rough. That being said, if there's nothing else, like another weird point is, and he did play really good per minute last season, so I'll give you that actually. What I will say is, because of their luxury tax situation, they can't get anybody else, so there's no reason not to try. And you can always offload. I do find that teams undervalue that you can just do what the Nuggets did, which is if you just offer up draft picks, people will take bad contracts off your hands. So no contract is untradeable. I don't hate this, but I do think that Cleveland is just going to be back in the lottery next season. I'd be willing to put money on that.
Yeah, especially if Love does not stay healthy.
All right. Well, I'm out of normal topics. I have like two others that I'm going to call like topics/shout out. So if you have anything else you want to say on the regular season, we can do that. And then,
yeah, I mean, we've got like a couple more free agents. There's not too many of them left to sign. I want to look at that real fast. This is who is still out there. Clint Capella is the big one, obviously. It looks like he wasn't happy with what the Rockets offered him in terms of a multi-year deal, so maybe he'll just go back there on a one-year deal. Who knows? But he's still out there. Otherwise, yeah, I'm not impressed with Rodney Hood. Greg Monroe, that's interesting. But the rest of these guys, not really difference makers anymore. The one thing I will say is Vince Carter signed a $2.4 million deal with the Hawks today. That's awesome. He's 41 years old. The exception to the rule, just like you were talking about earlier. It would have been nice to see him, make a playoff run next year. Who knows? Maybe the Hawks can do that, or maybe he'll go somewhere during, the trade period. So, yeah, Vince Carter officially playing another year in the NBA.
Well, I'm curious. We'll push this off to another week as more develops. Like Minnesota is a weird situation with Jimmy Butler, but we'll let that simmer. We have time to talk. Okay, so some topics I want to give out. This is like a shout out / topic. Jenny Busek was hired by the Dallas Mavericks to be on the bench. Fantastic. Excellent. Thank goodness. Get away from the Kings. She got hired by the Kings like 2 seasons ago, and you were like, congrats. And I was like, kind of, but they ruin everything I love, so I don't happy. This is fantastic. We love the Dallas Mavericks. We love Jenny Busek. And then additionally, they signed how did I drop his name? The best, one of the best centers in the NBA.
DeAndre Jordan, yeah.
Dear God. DeAndre Jordan and Andre Drummond. Just destroy me because they always combine in my head.
Should put Andre Iguodala at center. He'd probably do well there.
Oh, God.
Or you, for that matter. You're another one.
Not a center. But, they basically have made some. They drafted one of our favorite players in the draft. They signed one of our free agents. They put one of our favorite coaches on the bench. Dallas fan. I'm going to have to get some Dallas paraphernalia for next season. Just went on the show a few times, Brian. Shout out to Dallas. Hell yeah for Jenny Busek. We love that. Then another huge shout out. Dave Barry has been doing a bunch of great posts. He was on WA Insider podcast to talk about paying the WNBA. He's basically said something kind of really fascinating in that he has become part of the zeitgeist, in that he has written a bunch of articles for Forbes about how WNBA players deserve to be paid more. And the number he keeps using is that they're basically paid roughly 20 to 25% of the available salary revenue as compared to the NBA, where players are made about 50%. And he noted that this number that was all of his research is just kind of started to get quoted in the mainstream as fact, where he's not getting linked anymore because it's just become that pervasive. But he did a great article for Forbes on WNBA pay, on how they deserve to get paid more. By the way, this is a non-starter. If you do come up to me, I stopped. I actually did an unblock, if this makes sense, on Twitter. Anybody that I blocked, I unblocked. I do mute people, but I also periodically go through and unmute. So I'll mute people if they irk me. I'll periodically go through and unmute. I usually do not block. And in fact, as I mentioned, I went through it. If I blocked you in the past, you've been unblocked. With the exclusion of, if I talk about WNBA and you hop into my mentions and say no one wants to watch the WNBA, I just block you because it's so frustrating and annoying, and it pretty much guarantees ahead of time I have no interest in talking to you. But so he has done these great articles for Forbes on WNBA pay and how even if you note that they're a smaller league than the NBA, which of course they are, the piece of the pie they're giving the players is criminal. And that also hurts their own product. I think on the WNBA Insider podcast, he noted that one of the best players in the WNBA, I'm forgetting which, she played overseas in the offseason because the WNBA doesn't pay well. And she looked really bad at the beginning of the season. And the comparison I made to Dave when I was talking about that is Yao Ming. Yao Ming was this player. If you look at his rookie contract, he looked so amazing. He looked like he was set to become something and just never turned into it, was out with injuries. And in his own autobiographies and interviews, he's basically said the amount of time he devoted to playing to the Chinese national squad definitely hurt his longevity. So the WNBA is doing the same thing where their players can't afford to just play as WNBA players full time. So they go overseas, and then you got a worse product as a result. So fantastic work that, like I said, is getting a lot of traction and, becoming part of the zeitgeist. So I'm really happy about that. So those are kind of my shout out last 2 topics, Brian. If you've got anything to add to that, then I'll let you finish up.
Yeah, we didn't talk enough Warriors in this show, Dre, so I'll shout out some Warriors stuff here. We got to keep them in the front of the zeitgeist, as you would say. I'm wearing my Steve Kerr shirt today, and he has officially signed a contract extension with the Warriors. That's not big news because the Warriors and Steve Kerr had mutual interest in each other and continuing their relationship, but it's more that maybe Steve Kerr is feeling optimistic about his health, which has been a big concern, that maybe that might have been why he wasn't signing a new deal. So hopefully Steve Kerr is looking healthy and he has a new deal. I guess coach health matters too, not just players. And then here on Twitch TV, it's been announced recently that Steph Curry and Andre Iguodala are becoming esports investors. Curry is investing in TSM, and I can't remember the details of Iguodala. I'm always a little bit skeptical of a bubble coming up right now, but I wish them all the best with their investments.
Sounds good. All right, that's been our show. If you found us not through the website, you can find us at the site boxscoregeeks.com for more tools and analysis. We go live every week on twitch.tv/nerd numbers, 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, usually Monday or Tuesday. This week we went late for a variety of funny reasons, but is what it is. Just keep, when we finally get a regular schedule nailed down, Brian, we'll start announcing it more regularly. But anyway, that said, you can subscribe on iTunes and Stitcher, the Boxscore Geeks Show. If you upvote us, leave us a review. That really helps out. And then if you missed the live shows, you can catch the recap on channel Nerd Numbers on YouTube. I've been your host, Trey Alvarez. You can find me on Twitter as Nerd Numbers. Co-host Brian Foster, you can find on Twitter as Boxscore Brian. And with us, as always, in spirit, Patrick Minton, you can find on Twitter as NBA Geek. That's been our show. Order yourself a cookie, and we'll see you next time.